August 20th. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Nunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Jill, we're coming to you live from the United Center in Chicago as we record this on night one of the Democratic National Convention.
Moshe, I know we're going to spend some time talking about the convention, but let's just say it was a little hectic for you to get to where you are.
Things that should take 10 minutes have taken 2.5 hours between protesters and traffic and logistics and volunteers figuring things out here. There's a lot of people here, several thousand members of the media, several thousand delegates. It's a city, Chicago, so there's people doing their thing. And so all of that together, it meant for a lot of waiting in lines today, Joe. But we're here.
That's right. I'm glad you got there. You're in one piece. You're feeling better. Ready to go.
And I'll tell you this. I'm in Chicago, my hometown, which I love. And it's like a perfect 78-degree day. Jill, Chicagoans know this. There's like 11 of those days a year. Like a couple happen in April, a couple happen in May. To have it in like August when it's like sometimes 110. Anyway, fingers crossed weather sticks out this week. But Chicago, it is a week to be in Chicago. The weather is beautiful.
All right, let's get to some headlines here. The DNC Opens in Chicago, how it's going inside and outside the convention center. Pennsylvania Governor and VP first runner-up Josh Shapiro talks to Mo News.
Yeah, we sat down with the Gov a few hours ago, talking politics, talking faith. Jill, it was a very fascinating conversation.
In my neck of the woods, former Congressman George Santos pleads guilty to fraud charges.
In your neck of the woods, that's your former congressman right there.
Aware, Moshe, aware. To the Middle East, Israel accepts a hostage ceasefire plan, and now the U.S. is urging Hamas to do the same. It is possibly the most coveted endorsement of the campaign season, Taylor Swift. And now Donald Trump is promoting AI images to falsely suggest that Swift endorsed him.
Yeah, nobody's really believing this. The question is, how is Taylor going to respond? How are the Swifties going to respond? Jill, I was just on a bus to the convention center, and the rumor, well, the aspirational rumor among delegates here is, do you think Beyonce and Taylor are going to perform together here in a surprise endorsement? There's no actual reporting on that, but that's the hope and prayer of the Democrats around me.
It's like if they just put it out there, and maybe they're hoping that somehow it will come to fruition. And talk show pioneer Phil Donahue dies at the age of 88. We'll look back at his legacy. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Jill, the quote is, I'm so excited, I'm so excited, I'm so scared. On this day in history.
I know it, Moshe.
Oh, I didn't even need to sing it like I'm so excited. Anyway, you got it. Good. It's an early 90s reference for all of you.
All right, the Democratic National Convention opened Monday with a burst of energy and optimism in Chicago. Replacing President Biden at the top of the ticket with Vice President Kamala Harris has led Democrats to be competitive with former President Trump again as the election nears. Replacing President Biden at the top of the ticket with Vice President Kamala Harris has led Democrats to be competitive with former President Trump as the election is now less than 80 days away. President Biden delivered the major primetime address Monday night at the convention, receiving a standing ovation. He said he will be campaigning for Harris and doing whatever it takes to ensure a Democratic victory this fall. And it is the main reason he said that he withdrew from the race to ensure that Democrats can win. He was joined by the vice president on stage for a ceremonial handoff, passing of the torch moment. This upbeat and celebratory gathering is a sharp reversal for Democrats who were dreading this election until Biden dropped out on July 21st. The polling in his last few weeks showed a Trump landslide. Harris is looking to leverage the energy this week and continue the momentum of the past few weeks. She's going to be giving the final keynote address on Thursday night. But first, let's listen to a bit of what Biden had to say last night.
And I believe now that progress was and is possible. Justice is achievable. And our best days are not behind us, they're before us. Now it's summer. The winter has passed. And with a grateful heart, I stand before you now on this August night to report that democracy has prevailed. Democracy has delivered. And now democracy must be preserved.
Moshe, you are there. What are your thoughts?
So, Jill, before we get to Biden here, just before the taping, I was on that very, very, very long bus ride from downtown Chicago to the United Center for the events. I was actually riding with delegates, a bit of the California delegation, who has the primo seating in the convention floor. Typically, whoever the nominee is gives their home state the best seats, the most seats, the California delegation being the largest delegation. So one of them was telling me on the bus that they feel like they've had to endure 8 years to get to this moment. And I was like, endure 8 years? You had 4 years of Trump, sure, but you had 4 years of Biden. Like, yeah, I totally love Biden, and we wouldn't be here without Biden, but this is different. This feels different. And you could sense this excitement, I mean, almost childhood level excitement from delegates who feel something to be excited about here, which is fascinating. And it really is one of the reasons why we have a competitive race. You know, as you mentioned, people were really dreading a Biden election. People were not excited about him. You go back a couple of years, the majority of Democrats didn't want him to run for re-election. That said, a lot of gratitude, thanks on Monday night as he gave that major address. All right, now for that Biden speech. It was really quite a moment in the arena as thousands of his supporters gave him several minutes of a standing ovation. He enters in the arena after a very heartfelt intro by his daughter Ashley, a previous speech by Jill Biden. We love Joe chants, we love Joe signs. They wouldn't let him talk for several minutes as he looked around the arena and got cheers from the devoted Democratic audience here. The speech ran very late. In fact, Joe started so late, they actually had a planned video tribute to him. And James Taylor was in the crowd about to do a live performance that he had practiced. Both were canceled because of how late things were going. Biden himself went for about an hour, well past midnight Eastern time. It did feel like the speech Biden would have given if he was the nominee on Thursday night. I don't know that he did that much tweaking to the speech. You know, he went through a number of his achievements over the last 4 years, why voting for Trump would be tantamount to destroying the country. It was really Biden's greatest hits. America can do great things, stories about his parents growing up, connecting with the middle class. And he also did make the case for Harris and Walz. Kamala Harris, Doug Emhoff walked out on stage afterwards along with the Biden family to greet him. You know, it's notable to me, Biden never got his convention in 2020. It was a Zoom convention because of COVID. And this time around, he didn't get to run for re-election like he wanted to. So this was pretty much his convention moment as president. There was another energetic moment at the beginning of the night as Kamala Harris surprised the audience and addressed them for a couple minutes at the beginning of the convention. You really could feel the energy in the room there. And I will say that probably the most energetic speech of the night was Hillary Clinton, which we'll get to now.
Among the other speakers Monday night was former 2016 nominee and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. She was the party's first ever female presidential nominee, looking to be the first woman president. Harris is now the second.
We put a lot of cracks in the highest, hardest glass ceiling. Tonight, so close to breaking through once and for all. I want to tell you what I see through all those cracks and why it matters for each and every one of us. What do I see? I see freedom. I see the freedom to make our own decisions about our health, our lives, our loves, our families. Freedom to work with dignity and prosper, to worship as we choose or not, to speak our minds freely and honestly. I see freedom from fear and intimidation, from violence and injustice, from chaos and corruption. I see the freedom to look our children in the eye and say, in America, you can go as far as your hard work and talent will take you, and mean it. And you know what? On the other side of that glass ceiling is Kamala Harris raising her hand and taking the oath of office as our 47th President of the United States.
Yeah, you hear Clinton there invoking that glass ceiling. She often talked about it in 2008. She talked about it in 2016 when she ran for president both times. She was a nominee in 16. A very rousing speech from Clinton, the focus on history as another woman nominee here, invoking the women who came before her and making the case, in fact, relaying her vision that Harris will be the one to break the glass ceiling. The idea being that women in America have broken through every other ceiling. The last one is that glass ceiling of the presidency. Clinton also came back with some of her greatest hits from campaigns previous. I covered a number of them. She invoked "It takes a village" to raise kids and help grow America. She came out to her 2016 campaign theme song, Sarah Bareilles' "Brave." Notably, Clinton also took a moment to really try to contrast Harris with Trump, really lay into Trump. On the early end, she probably was one of the more aggressive speeches when it comes to really making the case against Trump here, talking about Harris locking up criminals versus Trump's 34 felony convictions himself. And in a twist of fate, you heard her talking about Trump to a crowd saying, "Lock him up." Of course, famously, Trump is the one who would speak about Clinton back in 2016 to chants of "Lock her up." She also made a point of saying that this campaign has parallels to her campaign and made a joke about the fact that Harris is also being critiqued about her looks and her laugh in the same way that Trump mocked Hillary Clinton's laugh and looks back in 2016.
Moshe, it is a who's who of Democratic politics, past and future this week. You've got the Obamas, former President Clinton, and the next generation, Pete Buttigieg, Governor Gretchen Whitmer, Governor Josh Shapiro. Speaking of which, you had a chance to chat with Shapiro on Monday.
Yeah, it's interesting. You referred to him earlier as the first runner-up, the man who was almost prom king. It came down to him and Tim Walz. Of course, Harris went with Tim Walz. But Shapiro says he's all in. That Democrats need to win this election. This is an existential election for the country. So he'll be here. He's already hosting events. Our conversation was brief as he was headed to an event. So hoping to bump into him at another point this week. And he represents a really important state. In fact, the state we talked about that could dictate who wins, Pennsylvania, 19 electoral votes. We talked about how it was once Florida. It was once Ohio. It now likely comes down to Pennsylvania. He's a Democratic governor, but he's got a Republican legislature. It's a split legislature, actually. So he talks about how he's the only Democratic governor that has to work with a split legislature and how he crosses party lines. And I asked him, given that you guys actually do bipartisanship in Pennsylvania, what lessons do you have for Kamala Harris, for Tim Walz, for messaging for Democrats? You talk to Republicans in your state. What is your advice to them? Here's a bit of that.
Well, look, I'm not going to give Kamala or Tim advice, right? I will tell you what I do and the way I've been able to be successful in every election I've run in Pennsylvania. And that is showing up, meeting people where they are. In Pennsylvania, we've got rural, urban, suburban communities. And I'll tell you what, the terrain looks really different as you travel across our vast state. But even though it looks different, folks basically want the same four things, right? They want good schools for their kids. They want safe communities. They want economic opportunity where they have a fair shot, no matter what they look like or where they come from, who they love, who they pray to. And fourth and finally, they want their freedoms and rights protected, not limited.
So, Jill, that's his sales pitch. He says that, whether people live in rural areas, whether they live in cities, places like Philadelphia or rural Pennsylvania, they want the same thing. They want low crime. They want freedom. They want good schools. And he feels that messaging around that and selling what Democrats are doing around that is the winning strategy. We also, of course, talked about the last couple of weeks, that whole VP process where he almost became the vice president. And the accusation, the assertion out there that he wasn't chosen because of his faith, because of his Jewish faith. It's something that Donald Trump actually said in his home state in Pennsylvania this weekend. He says, well, he wasn't chosen because he's Jewish, and they have an issue with that in the party. So I pushed Shapiro a bit on that, asking him about particularly what he said when Harris announced Walz and he gave the intro speech in Pennsylvania 2 weeks ago. And he made a point, Shapiro, in this speech, talking about how he's proud of his faith at this rally. So I asked him about that, and here's a bit of his answer.
What is disturbing is not that there was anti-Semitism directed at me, which there was, but I want to be very clear, not by the vice president in any way, shape, or form. That had nothing to do with the outcome.
You don't believe you weren't selected because of
Oh, no, not at all. I can tell you with absolute certainty that anti-Semitism played absolutely no role in the dialogue I had with the vice president. None. It's not to say that there isn't anti-Semitism, but I think what is troubling to me is not that it is directed at me, but that it exists in our society. And I think leaders have a responsibility to speak and act with moral clarity. And that means standing up against anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, racism, all forms of hatred and bigotry. We need to condemn it. Donald Trump is someone who stokes it. Donald Trump is someone who works to divide.
Right, he says Jews need to have their head examined if they vote Democrat.
Right, which like in and of itself is, pretty blatantly bigoted. I do think it is important that we stand up and speak out, especially right now. And the reason I said that the other night in particular at this rally, which I didn't have prepared remarks, I really spoke from the heart, is I want people who I know were seeing the anti-Semitism slung at me and feeling vulnerable themselves. I wanted them to know that they should be proud of their faith as well, whatever their faith is, and that they should never back down to the bigots, and they should always stand up and be strong in their convictions.
So notable there, Jill, he makes a point of saying he does not believe that his faith had anything to do with Harris's decision. But you certainly see Republicans needling that, and you see even some Democrats who say, "Are you sure you underwent a campaign from the left that was particularly at times tinged with anti-Semitic statements?" And he said he remains adamant that yes, it is an issue. He's going to fight it. He's proud of who he is. And so that's a bit of our Shapiro conversation. I'll have more from it on our Instagram account and on this podcast later this week.
All right, time for the speed read from the Washington Post. Disgraced former Congressman George Santos pleaded guilty Monday to a pair of felony fraud charges. In case you don't remember, Santos is the congressman from my area, New York, 3rd District, whose political career unraveled after he admitted to fabricating key elements of his background.
We don't talk about Bruno, Jill.
So Santos admitted to defrauding donors to his 2022 campaign by taking their money for his personal use and charging thousands of dollars on their credit cards without authorization, among other charges. Sentencing guidelines indicate that Santos could face more than 6 years in prison. The judge set a sentencing date of February 7th. As part of the agreement, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts, wire fraud and identity theft. And prosecutors said that they would ask the judge to dismiss the remaining 21 counts at his sentencing. He admitted in court to wrongfully claiming unemployment benefits for nearly a year and making false statements to Congress on his required disclosure statements in which he said that he had millions of dollars in fabricated assets.
Santos humbled after all this time. He has to repay $300,000 to donors and other people that he defrauded. Jill, there's a lot of Cameo videos he's got to make, and I keep getting alerts from Cameo that his price keeps going down. Remember, initially he was making those Cameo custom videos. People were paying like $500 for it when it was like a thing. Now I think he's only charging $50. He's desperate, folks. He's got to repay these people.
He's on OnlyFans. That's his next thing.
George Santos is on a lot until he goes to prison, sentenced in February. He also has to refund the government for unemployment benefits that he stole. It's just like literally anything that he could do wrong, he did, apparently. His quote yesterday, "I deeply regret my conduct. I fully accept responsibility for my actions. I understand my actions have betrayed the trust of my supporters." I imagine that's past tense. I don't know who's a George Santos supporter anymore. He says that he allowed his ambition to cloud his judgment. And that his district trusted him to represent you with honor and to uphold the values that are essential to our democracy, and that I failed you. Jill, that's what he said to you, the voters of your district in Long Island. Santos, by the way, is only 36 years old. He's still in his mid-30s there, youngin'. He's done so much. He's committed so many crimes in so little time. He was elected to Congress back in 2022, and that's when a whole bunch of news reports came out after he was elected that he basically lied about everything. His high school, his college, sports he didn't play, He said he worked at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street and Citigroup. He didn't. He said that his mother was inside the World Trade Center on 9/11. She wasn't. He said that his grandparents fled the Holocaust. They didn't. And so I could go on. Let's bury the George Santos thing. We'll bring you the update of how long he'll serve in prison when that's announced by the judge in February. Unless, Jill, you will have some final words for your former congressman.
I don't. I'm just upset that I didn't figure it out before the election.
Well, now you have your newsletter.
Yes.
So start digging into the next guy.
I'm on it. All right, from USA Today, an update on the Middle East. Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Monday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who announced support for Blinken's bridging proposal aimed at creating a ceasefire tied to the release of Hamas-held hostages and Israeli-held militants. Netanyahu's office issued a statement saying the prime minister was committed to, quote, the current American proposal on the release of our hostages, which takes into account Israel's security needs. Blinken spoke to reporters in Tel Aviv. He said negotiations were at a decisive moment and urged Hamas to accept the proposal.
The next important step is for Hamas to say yes, and then in the coming days for all of the expert negotiators to get together to work on clear understandings on implementing the agreement.
The meeting, however, came hours after Hamas dismissed the plan as little more than a reflection of Netanyahu's demands. Months of sporadic talks have hit roadblocks over Israel demanding that Hamas be destroyed as a military and political force, and Hamas demanding a permanent ceasefire rather than a temporary one. Another major issue is Netanyahu's demand, which has been rejected by Hamas, that the Israeli military remain deployed along the Gaza-Egypt border to prevent Hamas from smuggling weapons into Gaza. That deployment, not part of Israel's proposal back in May that had been the baseline for negotiations since.
Yeah, Hamas ain't into this right now. So as much as Blinken goes there, tries to strike a deal, says we're close, this side agrees, these guys agree, Hamas says, no, we're not into this right now. So this is where we stand. And it came, Jill, as on Monday, Hamas's military wing took responsibility for a suicide bombing inside Tel Aviv on Sunday and threatened further attacks, which at a time where you're negotiating a ceasefire is not typically a very good thing. Israeli police saying that a powerful explosive was detonated in southern Tel Aviv. And initially, the Israeli police didn't mention a suicide attack, but Hamas says it was a suicide bomber. If confirmed, it would be the first suicide bombing inside Israel in nearly 8 years. One Israeli passerby was moderately injured. Otherwise, no casualties at this time. And it comes as the families of the hostages who have been held there, going nearly on 11 months now, met with Tony Blinken. They're putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu to agree to a deal here. Again, Blinken says he's agreed to a deal, but there's some clauses in there that Hamas doesn't like. And so there are some families who are speaking out right now, including the mother of the 20-year-old Naama Levy. Her mother, Ayelet, spoke out, saying that she does not want the Israeli government to sacrifice my daughter and the dozens of helpless hostages that they still believe are alive there in captivity.
From the New York Times, former President Trump set the internet ablaze on Sunday when he shared social media posts suggesting that Taylor Swift had endorsed him and that her fans could help him win the November election. In a post on his social media site, Truth Social, Trump drew attention to a group of images that were created using artificial intelligence. One showed Swift dressed up as Uncle Sam with the headline, "Taylor Swift wants you to vote for Donald Trump." The other depicted a crowd of young women wearing matching Swifties for Trump t-shirts. "I accept," Trump wrote in the post, seemingly implying that he had received Swift's endorsement. Swift, by the way, has not made an endorsement this election cycle after backing Biden in 2020. A representative for Swift did not immediately respond to a request for comment.
So there's a statement from the Trump campaign here. We're waiting on more clarity from Trump here. The spokesperson for Trump says, "Swifties for Trump is a massive movement that grows bigger every single day, while Kamala Harris is guilty as sin for all the hurt she has caused every American." That's what we got from Trump world there. We haven't heard anything from Taylor Land. The question is how she can respond here. Will it be legal action? Will it be in a song? Will it be via political endorsement, as some of the Democrats around me right now at the convention are hoping for? She apparently could pursue something legally here because Trump's fake endorsement does likely violate Swift's right of publicity, the legal power on how you control your name and image. I think that's probably unlikely at this juncture, but it is interesting because there is a new law called the No Fakes Act that is currently under debate in Congress that makes it illegal to publish a digital replica of someone's likeness without their consent, which is what Trump did in this case. And this is a big deal as the AI world continues to grow. But I don't know how many people are really believing that Taylor Swift actually endorsed Donald Trump. She did endorse Joe Biden back in 2020. She has not endorsed this go around, but there has been this obsession this go around, especially among a number of people in the MAGA movement around Taylor Swift, her boyfriend, Travis Kelce. There was the theory in January that the Pentagon, the CIA, was getting them together and then having the Chiefs win the Super Bowl to then help Joe Biden at the time. Of course, that never came to fruition. Trump has talked about Swift a lot. He has complained about her to House Republicans, that she didn't endorse him in 2020, that she's a liberal. And then, Jill, there's this quote, which I shared on Instagram. And then there's this quote that he gave a reporter last year, where he repeatedly calls Swift beautiful but liberal. I think she's beautiful, very beautiful. I find her very beautiful. I think she's liberal. She probably doesn't like Trump. I hear she's very talented. I think she's very beautiful. Actually, unusually beautiful. This is the full quote from Donald Trump. So he thinks about Taylor Swift a lot, probably more than Taylor Swift thinks about him, and did this. We'll see what comes of it, but it was all the talk on social media yesterday.
From NBC News, Phil Donahue, the innovative TV host who rose to fame in the late 1960s after being the first person to interact with a studio audience and bring new ideas into American living rooms, died on Sunday. He was 88 years old. The cause of his death was not immediately disclosed, although his family said he'd been suffering from a long illness. According to a statement from his family, quote, groundbreaking TV talk show journalist Phil Donahue died Sunday night at a home surrounded by his wife of 44 years, Marlo Thomas, his sister, his children, grandchildren, and his beloved golden retriever, Charlie. At his peak, his nationally syndicated The Phil Donahue Show, later renamed just Donahue, was a ratings hit and a precursor to similar shows by hosts Montel Williams and Jerry Springer. Oprah Winfrey, another talk show icon, described Donahue as a trailblazer who invented smart talk in the afternoon and brought startling new ideas into the living rooms and laundry rooms of American women.
Yeah, Oprah said if there was no Phil Donahue show, there would have never been an Oprah Winfrey show. He was the first to acknowledge that women are interested in more than mascara tips and cake recipes, that we're intelligent, we're concerned about the world around us, and we want the best possible lives for ourselves. That was a big thing for Donahue. He described himself as a feminist at a time when many men did not. As far as how this whole thing got started, how Donahue ushered in the talk show era, he did it by accident. So this is Dayton, Ohio, 1967, and an audience arrives for a variety show, which had been canceled. Well, Donahue says, these people all arrive for the show. Why not have them stick around and watch me interview this celebrity? At the time, her name was Madeline Murray O'Hare. She was becoming an atheist. He was interviewing her. And he's like, let's have the studio audience stick around. Do any of you guys have any questions for her? And so he did it. Thereby, that day, he invents, effectively, daytime talk. It becomes the industry standard. The fact you have a studio audience, they ask questions. We take it for granted. Phil Donahue came upon it by accident. And he was doing serious issues. He was talking about the war. He was talking about abortion. But he was also talking about the entertainers, a whole variety of topics. And so fascinating how these things come about, Jill. Oprah says, again, this whole concept wouldn't have existed without Donahue. He would go on, he would have a primetime show very briefly on cable in the early 2000s that gets canceled. But it's his contributions to daytime talk. And, for those of us of a certain generation growing up, daytime talk, you came from school, and there are all these shows, the Ricky Lake Show and the Montel Williams Show and the Jerry Springer Show and Donahue for a very long time, all basically inspired by Donahue. I should mention earlier this year, President Biden honored Donahue with the highest civilian medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom. All right, on this day in history now, on this day in 1741, a Danish explorer, Vitus Bering, who was doing work for Russia, encounters Alaska for the first time. On this day in 1896, the dial telephone gets a patent. This was a big one for those of us who remember the 90s. Lyle and Eric Menendez murdered their parents on this day in 1989. It was a media sensation, a lot of coverage, one of those trials of the century from Southern California in the early 90s. And on this day, speaking of the 90s, in 1998, President Clinton authorized cruise missile strikes on Afghanistan on a guy named Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network that followed the al-Qaeda bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania at the time, killed more than 200 people. Al-Qaeda had declared war on America at the time. Clinton was sort of enmeshed in the Lewinsky scandal at that moment. So he launches these missile strikes. They don't accomplish that much. And that effectively is the main brunt of the U.S. military attempt on bin Laden in the lead up to 9/11. And we end here with a bit of pop culture history. On this day, 35 years ago, Saved by the Bell premieres, August 20th, 1989, Jill.
Hence your tease, Moshe, at the top of the podcast. I'm so excited. A little Jessie Spano. That was our first experience, I guess. I think she was on caffeine pills, right? That's
what happened. To give you a sense, kids those days, it was like the really urgent crisis of the caffeine pill addiction. And Jessie's taking caffeine pills to get all of her work done and has like a breakdown. And this was like a big moment. Like, for those of us growing up at the time, we're like, oh my God, caffeine pills. Like, stay away from them. Jessie Spano.
It's funny the things that we worried about back in the 90s.
Yeah, well, simpler times back then when you're like, oh my God, stay away from caffeine pills, kids. And we were all using our Dare pencils, thanks to Nancy Reagan. Stay off drugs. I mean, some of the ads you actually see from the 80s and 90s where like little kids, like their ads where like somebody's coming up to like a little kid on the street being like, do you want to do drugs with me? And they're like, these most unrealistic examples, but that's how we were learning to say no to drugs back then, Jill.
All right, Moshe, that's a wrap here on the Mo News podcast. Thank you all for listening. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. Will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store. Moshe, hang in there in Chicago.
Oh, we're thriving in Chicago, baby.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful day.